tools like Intel 471 and attack service management tools like Spiderfoot. My name is Dave Brooks. I'm the Director of Intelligence Solutions for Americas. So from here, just moving forward, it's critical to understand what ransomware is fundamentally. I think the majority of folks probably listening to this webinar probably have heard of ransomware attacks in the news. The goal of this presentation is to go through and depict not only just ransomware, because just like a lot of folks know, it's the ransomware, the encryption doesn't just happen. There's typically actions that occur before that, like initial access tactics, like initial access brokers, like vulnerability exploitations, like things that can be essentially prevented and monitored. Ransomware is typically the last stage of a cyber threat, and typically the stage of a breach that is the end result of non-mitigation tactics that either didn't work very well or didn't work at all, right? So the goal of this conversation is to cover the initial access brokers and some of the functionality and the TTPs of threat actors by leveraging cyber threat intel environments and tool sets. So these are some of the articles that I pulled from the open web, just random articles regarding common attacks and ransomware campaigns. What we like to leverage to understand attack landscape, either externally as well as internally, is the malware information and access attack lifestyle, or life cycle, I should say. From our perspective, the cycle circulates, right? So there'll be malware infestation typically, impacting platform and platform vulnerabilities, whether that's IoT, whether that's external web servers, things of that nature. Malware will essentially target platforms and expose and kind of vulnerable environments, right? That could be deployed, leveraging an array of tactics, phishing, hands-on keyboard attacks. There's an array of kind of methodologies to get in the door these days, right? So from an emulation perspective, there's ways to track TTPs through there. From an analysis perspective, understanding attack campaigns is important to malware, to platform. But getting to platform, it's also important to understand vulnerability exploitation by monitoring CVE and attack intelligence. So the viability of the attack surface on these platforms are also important when it comes to understanding initial access tactics and techniques to get in the door to prevent ransomware to begin with, right? So once malware is deployed and successfully initiated to a vulnerable platform, information essentially is then stolen. At that stage in the attack, that can also be monitored as well. So from the information theft, typically that's broadcasted or it's sold within criminal marketplaces, whether that be Genesis Store or the Russian market, some of the common prolific kind of marketplaces out there. Also within forums and IM services, there's threat actors that are advertising the sale of this information to monetize the exploitation of these platforms. So once the information is essentially distributed, a lot of monetization of that attack is then commenced at that stage. Access is also sold. So either malware from information stealer that doesn't require full system access can be deployed via plugin and other tactics. The initial access is also a stage of monetization. All of these phases are trackable from implementation of certain intelligence tracking and aggregating tools, so which we're going to cover in a little bit within this presentation. So from the access level, the initial access, that stage, that also needs to be advertised and distributed. So typically at this stage, what will happen, what we've seen from our experience, is once the access is sold at that stage, it's a little bit obfuscated. So the threat actor doesn't necessarily want the world to know that they have access to an organization. So they'll say, hey, look, I have access to this telecommunication company. They're 4 billion in annual revenue, and so from that stage, kind of leveraging tactics, typically kind of pertinent to source and things like that. Sometimes we can understand who the victim is from a victimology perspective and be able to assist that organization with either acquiring that access or at least getting additional intelligence on that content. So again, each one of these stages is pivotable and trackable within our CTI tool. The last phase of the MIA cycle is unfortunately the ransomware stage, which is also the more public or the more kind of known stage of an attack. Because at this point, the threat actors, they don't care who knows, right? At that stage, they just essentially want to further and maximize the monetization of these ransomware campaigns. But again, it all starts from the initial access phase, from a tactic perspective, to the brokers, again, which is all trackable. So the exploitation, so again, how this is kind of trackable, again, from access broker to ransomware as a service affiliate to the actual ransomware as a service operation, right? All of these are services and techniques. So finding the initial attack vector, how is that possible? So again, chatter on underground forums outlining the following vectors, as you see on the slide. RDP access is often sold from that initial access phase, from botnet infection, VPN-based access, cloud storage solutions, vulnerabilities. Again, these are just essentially how the attack vectors are mapped. So we offer and hand over initial access to affiliates that purchase it, basically. So that's essentially the transaction phase. So the offering and the handover of initial access to the affiliates. So again, that's kind of the phase. So the tactic to the broker, to the RAS operator. So to initiate the encryption or the ransomware activity. So again, once that happens, the affiliation demand by selling on dump shops, marketplaces, instant message environments, and private chats, leveraging extensive advertisement details. Again, these are all the vectors where these are distributed. So Russian market, Genesis Store, 2easy shops. Again, those are just marketplaces. So there are ad templates as well. So victim country, annual revenue. Again, like I just stated earlier, so oftentimes this can allude to targetability and interest level, especially if you're a threat actor or an affiliate to a RAS gang that is targeting an actual particular industry. Then that may be a little bit more of interest than if you're not targeting educational services, but you are targeting the healthcare industry, right? So they may want to go after the healthcare content more, right, depending on what's being advertised within these ad templates. Once network domain initial access is obtained, threat actors leverage tools and TTPs to move laterally, escalate privileges, exfiltrate or destroy data, and deploy ransomware. So again, that the initial access phase is a monetization step, and then at that stage, the breach or the large scale infiltration would occur in the lateral movement, and then the deployment of ransomware. This is a tactic that we've observed regarding search engine optimization poisoning. This one campaign is pertinent to the prolific campaign Gootloader. So basically, it starts as an SEO poisoning, and what's very unique about this one is it's not based on an ad-based campaign. So things like conventional ad blockers have a lot of difficulty when it comes to blocking these payloads. So you'll see them as an actual legitimate link. You go in as an unsuspecting victim, and you click on the link. Essentially, there'll be, it could be something that you think is actually legitimate, right? Kind of depending on what you're searching for. And then essentially at that stage, once items are kind of deployed, from that link or from that SEO poisoning campaign, that's when the actual payload will be dropped on the endpoint, right? So again, this is just an example of a tactic that's trackable from either malware emulation or campaign tracking individually, which we've done within our platform very extensively. This is an example, like I said, of Gootloader. This is the directory where the automotive products JavaScript is deployed. Then you can see, once that initiates, basically there's some injection into memory. From there's a PowerShell script that basically conducts reconnaissance on the endpoint. Again, this isn't full system exploitation, but this is the initial reconnaissance stage of a breach or an initial access campaign, right? So oftentimes we see the recon phases begin at organizations to begin gathering information, like things like exploitable credentials, as an example, exploitable vulnerabilities as another example, which we'll cover in a moment. But the net is this is just some imagery basically on some of these attack tactics, right? So once basically the process is injected in memory, there's some PowerShell, some obfuscated PowerShell commands that are deployed and initiated, and then the actual persistence mechanism in the scheduled task. So this is a vulnerable, obviously Windows endpoint. So at that point, the scheduled task will be generated, and then even after reboot, the persistence or the APT would then be established. But again, these are all trackable metrics that basically can be harvested and analyzed and kind of mitigated based on the attack tactics, right? Which it's important to understand the tactic to prevent a ransomware attack. So kind of following the basic interrogative trend here, we talked about the how and the what. The who, or the trackability around threat actors, again, in their native ecosystems and environments, is very important, right? So this is an example which we'll cover a bit later as well when we get a little bit more into a Titan or into 471's platform for CTI. But before we get into there, I'd like to introduce Wazawaka, aka Borsalin, arrested by FBI, as several aliases. So again, to understand the what is important as well, and another trackable metric. But to understand the who, at this stage, you can begin to paint accountability, as well as trend analytic, and to understand how some of these prolific threat actors are leveraging tools and tactics, and the affiliates that they also like to work with, right? So to do that, you have to really understand their native ecosystems for where they operate the most in, right? So for Wazawaka, these are the handles that he leverages. These are the forums that we've seen register to. So as you can see, this is Russian adversary. So you'll see the common language typically is going to be Cyrillic for Borsalin. Our threat intel analysts were also able to extrapolate the full name and identity based on just kind of common records and just kind of intel activities there. So from here, but again, you can see the forums like XSS and RAID forums, which obviously is no longer with us, but all sorts of forums and aliases that we have tied directly to this threat actor. So building profiles on these threat actors and these adversaries by their forensic titles is very important to be able to track from a law enforcement perspective, as well as an accuracy angle as well. So we tie all that together in our actor profiles. So understanding the who now is very important. Again, just a little bit more identity information. So again, to understand the TTPs, aliases, all those things, that's one thing. There's another psychology element for a lot of these threat actors that is also a vulnerable vector for exploitation if you're on the intel side, right? A lot of these threat actors are very arrogant. They're very prideful in their activities. Some of them have some substance abuse problems. Again, psychologically, the psychology around these threat actors is important to interpret too. So we track not only the tactics, the identities from a handle alias kind of perspective, or like a fingerprint angle on the digital side, but the psychology of these threat actors, you can kind of start to understand and determine kind of behavioral analysis of their activities to be able to, again, prevent and understand what they may or may not do in the future. So again, just some more kind of interpretation on Wazawaka. This is some examples from our access claims from February. So basically, this goes over victimology of attacks sectors from a strategic finished intel angle. So what this report does, we basically come out with some of these monthly reports that analyze access per threat actor, so you can get a high-level strategic overview of activity from threat actors. You can get a strategic high-level overview of impacted sectors. In order to do this, we leverage a very unique system called Priority Intelligence Requirements, or General Intelligence Requirements. GIR is what it's called. We have a handbook that comes out almost every quarter to update new GIRs. But the net is we've identified intel requirements that we can paint into each curated report that our analysts pump into Titan. With those GIR taggings, we can conduct metric analysis to give you kind of month by month and oftentimes week by week understanding of impact to sectors, countries, just like you're seeing on the screen, as well as threat actor activity as well, just baked into the GIR kind of metric analysis and the threat actor tracking. The right-hand side, these are some other kind of snippets of some of those reports. This is all kind of current event pertinent to time-relevant data. So this is kind of the last finished intel product that we came out for February for access claims. We'll have one come out, at probably the beginning of April for March as well. So again, a good kind of strategic high-level overview of global impact by sector, by threat actor, by tactic. All right. So again, once what we've done so far is we've kind of overlaid the tactics and the techniques that these initial access brokers are leveraging. We've gone over some of the psychology elements of some of the threat actors and why it's important to track by their aliases and their handles, and then also the kind of global impact. So at this stage, the question, oftentimes comes up, why is it important to track the access merchants? So once the initial access broker is accomplished and the initial access is achieved, at that point, again, it's another trackable kind of metric, right, to be able to prevent an unforgivable ransomware attack at the bottom here. So key enablers to financially motivated cybercrime. Again, the goal of these folks is very much financially incentivized. So again, we can get into these environments to track these campaigns. So it's important to understand the merchant and their environment. So getting into the next phase of this presentation is going to involve Intel Foursome 1 and what we recommend from a mitigation perspective. So from our tool set, we leverage an array of products. So number one being our attack surface management tool that we just acquired, that we are adding to our tool set, which I'll cover after this slide. So just as a company, fundamentally, what we've discovered, just from a metric perspective, so the access brokers to ransomware affiliation to the actual ransomware operation, the average time for this is typically about 71 days. And the monetization for initial access on forums, that's the access broker kind of step. Pay the access fee to the access broker for the ransomware affiliates. So again, there's a lot of monetization during this phase, but what I like to start off with is kind of the phase by phase analysis. So average time for completion from initial access to an actual paying for the access broker, which then will be passed off to the RAS operator, is typically about 71 days. The average ransom demand, and for Q1, this is based on our analysis, is about $3.79 million as an average. So again, to be able to mitigate that, fundamentally, you need to really set up a systematic attack surface protection kind of tool set. So number one, understanding from an open source intelligence angle what would be the most vulnerable and environmental, like attack vector, right? So what we leverage is a tool set called Spiderfoot to again, be able to conduct attack surface discovery, and then attack surface management, and finally a little bit more mature stage is the attack surface intelligent phase, right? So at that point, we can basically the initial scan would basically show from an attack surface perspective the easiest targets or the lowest hanging fruit, so to speak, that a threat actor could be able to leverage to conduct initial access tactics, right? Things like vulnerable web servers, right? That stuff can be achieved through basic kind of DNS resolution, through scanning, as far as vulnerability attribution for those IPs and things like that. And once a threat actor identifies these vulnerable vectors, they can then begin to start their initiation tactics to gain access, within kind of begin that 71-day timer that we just kind of talked about, right? Where if they get in the door for one endpoint, they can laterally pivot to others and then begin the acquisition phase to the access brokers. All right. By leveraging attack surface protection, you're also going to get a lot of attribution towards exploited external credentials as well. By gauging sources like have I been pwned. We leverage a data model set within Spiderfoot that encapsulates about 230 data modules that we're leveraging API to proactively ping and acquire elemental attribution for your particular environment. And then we can correlate the vulnerabilities and the attack surface to other data sets, other data modules incorporated into Spiderfoot. So it gives you a conclusive report for the attack surface of your environment. Moving forward, Titan fundamentally is more of a depth tool. So where Spiderfoot is more of an external tool, understanding kind of the low-hanging fruit, the pivotability from Spiderfoot into Titan, you can basically leverage Titan to now conduct investigations towards either the advertisement of Spiderfoot, scan result, like activity for vulnerable infrastructure. And you can begin to kind of track the targetability based on threat actor, based on vulnerability attack vectors, and paint an understanding of analytics for sector to understand if there's a particular threat actor that's targeting your sector. Like the analogy of, it's okay that you're also protecting your house. That's important to guard, your home. But the analogy of, if your neighbor's house next door has been attacked, that's also critical information to know. So at that stage, you can set up mitigating tactics based on certain techniques and exploitability for initial access brokers that are leveraging across your entire sector by analyzing content within Intel 471's Titan platform and the GIR system. So, but first you need to understand your attack surface by leveraging Spiderfoot. So that's kind of a step-by-step goal, basically, from our angle, from a strategy perspective. On our end, we leverage malware infiltration, botnet infiltration, campaign tracking to be able to gain analytics on how C2 infrastructure and command infrastructure on the malware side is frontally functioning. So at that point, you can start to embed mitigating tactics based on shifting C2 tactics and shifting functionality around kind of big prolific malware campaigns like Qbot, like Gootloader, like we just talked about, like Zloader, TrickBot, Emotet, like some of the main names as well. And then from the adversarial side, again, what we've kind of been talking about, again, by leveraging Intel 471, you can leverage the communication between threat actors and understand an internal perspective, just kind of based on the native ecosystem aggregation that we acquire within Intel 471, followed by the curated reporting. So on our reporting side, we give our clients the ability to understand a tactical understanding for breach organizations, tactical understanding for shifting tactics for malware campaigns, as well as a more actionable strategic information reports that are topic driven, either pertaining to bulletproof hosters, pertaining to kind of threat actor tactics, as well as, like I said, the whole psychology element around the activity around some of these active threat actors. And then finally, we have actual finished Intel products that kind of, again, show the hierarchical strategic topics from a strategic perspective. So that's kind of conclusively what we offer as far as the attack surface management, all the way down to the dark web monitoring or the criminal environments from a depth perspective. And back to wazawaka, again, this is more of an example, basically. These are some of the content that we pulled from a report, again, based on the psychology of wazawaka. Very pompous, very open about the exploitation and the capabilities that he has. He wants to brag about this. He wants to call out the organization. So once wazawaka actually gained access to this organization, he went through in very granular detail. I'm not going to cover the organization that was impacted, but for folks that have access to Titan can probably follow along. But within this is Cyrillic that he was chatting in with an XSS. Our native translators went in, basically translated it, and we captivated on this grandiose kind of boisterous personality, where again he went through step by step for how he gained initial access to this organization, the tactics that he leveraged, and the vulnerabilities that he exploited, all the way down in a very, very grueling, detail-oriented rant on XSS forum. So basically, we captivate on all that and help organizations understand those tactics in a structured kind of strategic way, right? So I think wazawaka got into this organization by leveraging internal blue vulnerabilities. So again, very patchable, very much mitigating, kind of tool setting and intelligence for organizations to understand why it's important to patch even old, outdated historical vulnerabilities. The other system that we leverage to help organizations mitigate and understand kind of exposure is by leveraging our credential monitoring tool. Here you can input your domain, and basically leveraging our automation and aggregation, we scrape content from high fidelity environments. So where our environment will kind of differentiate from other organizations, we're looking for a little bit more qualitative data. So we're not looking at things like open source and things like pay spends. From our experience, that's just not the niche that we wanted to fall in. We're looking for less alert inundation and more actionable kind of exploited credentials, right? So at this stage, you can set up alerting based on your own kind of Cred monitoring domains Cred managing domains, and be able to get alerted on compromised credentials from closed source environments, typically like exploit, IN. Sometimes there's content that's being kind of distributed there, but proactively we'll kind of scrape up cred sets from exploit, as well as Genesis Store from the marketplaces, and then the Russian market, some of these areas prolifically where these cred sets are being kind of distributed. So we scoop those up, extrapolate, put it into username, password format, and then allow organizations to be alerted on any, like I said, exploiter credentials. So this is all kind of demo data, not real, but just to give you an example of what it looks like. On the right-hand side, you can even track not only the cred set, but if there is like a conversation in a forum where it's being advertised. This is, like I said, an example of a threat actor advertising the actual distribution of these compromised credentials, and then further conversation, even kind of alluding to inquirers and folks that are also interested in that data. So that can show basically value or interest of other threat actors for exploiter credentials. So the big picture, so to speak, or an investigation platform. So on the vulnerability side, this is kind of the last phase, the last phase that we'll talk about, and in regards to prevention for initial access brokers. Again, understanding, number one, the attack surface. That's going to give you an understanding for which web servers are out there that may be vulnerable. What we leverage on the vulnerability monitoring side, or the vulnerability intel, is, of course, we're not like a CVE shop. We're not scanning all your endpoints like Tenable is, right? But what we do help and kind of conduct is patch prioritization and attack intelligence pertaining to exploited CVEs in the wild. So our analyst teams are actively looking at CVEs and in the actual criminal underground forums, source code that's being exploited, exploitability status we implement per CVE that we're tracking, and then we even implement this in a very API-friendly fashion that you can leverage to export this and enrich. So again, it's one thing to understand, how many CVEs you have in your environment. It's another thing to understand which one of those CVEs are actively being exploited by very credible threat actors, right? So we give you that attack intelligence attribution and map it in a criticality fashion. So from high, medium to low, right? And what elevates the criticality is the exploitability status, which we very, very conveniently display on the right-hand side. So exploitability status, like if there's code available for that CVE, right? We'll put that into a nice little icon. If it's been productized, or if it's been weaponized within Metasploit or something, right? We'll put all of those into the exploitability status, which could be easily implemented into systems. We have we've got native integration with Splunk and some other apps as well, and we conveniently fit into most threat intel platforms. But the enrichment here is very simple, so the ROI is quick on the vulnerability intel. But again, gives you that perspective on which CVEs are really being targeted in the wild. All right, with that being said, that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and